I.D.B. Being Tales of the Diamond Fields, retold by George Griffith. 500 Carats, a complete story. It was several months after the brilliant, if somewhat mysterious, recovery of £15,000 parcel from the notorious but now vanished Seth Salter that I had the pleasure, and I think I may fairly add the privilege, of making the acquaintance of Inspector Lipinski. I can say without hesitation that in the course of wanderings which I have led over a considerable portion of the lands and seas of the world, I've never met a more interesting man than he was. I say poor. I say was, poor fellow, for he is no longer anything but a memory of bitterness to the I.D.B. But that is a yarn with another twist. There is no need for further explanation of this all too brief intimacy which followed our introduction than the statement of the fact that the greatest South African detective of this day was after all a man as well as a detective, and hence not only justifiably proud of many brilliant achievements which illustrated his career, but also by no means loth in some day the story of them should, with all due and proper precautions and reservations, be told to a wider and possibly less prejudiced audience than the motley and migratory population of the camp, as it was in his day. I had not been 5 minutes in the cozy, tastily finished sanctum of his low, broad-roofed bungalow in New De Beers Road before I saw it was a museum as well as a study. Specimens of all sorts of queer apparatus employed by the I.D.Bs for smuggling diamonds were scattered all over the tables and mantelpiece. There were massive, handsomely carved briar and meerschaum pipes which seemed to hold wonderfully little tobacco for their size, rough sticks of firewood ingeniously hollowed out, which must have been worth a good round sum in their time, hollow handles of travelling trunks, ladies' boot heels of the fashion affected on the memorable occasion by Mrs. Michael Mortensen, and novels, hymn books, church services, and Bibles, with cavities cut out of the center of their leaves, which had once held thousands of pounds worth of illicit stones on their unsuspected passage through the post. But none of these interested, or indeed puzzled me so much as did a couple of curiously assorted articles which lay under a little glass case on a wall bracket. One was an ordinary piece of heavy lead tubing, about 3 inches long and an inch in diameter, sealed by fusing at both ends, and having a little brass cap fused on one end. The other was a small ragged piece of dirty red sheet, India rubber, very thin, in fact almost transparent, and, roughly speaking, 4 or 5 inches square. I was looking at these things, wondering what on earth could be the connection between them and what manner of strange story might be connected with them, when the inspector came in. "Good evening. Glad to see you," he said in his quiet and almost gentle voice, and without a trace of foreign accent, as we shook hands. "Well, what do you think of my museum? I dare say you've guessed already that if some of these things could speak, they could keep your readers entertained for some little time, eh?" "Well, there's no reason why their owner shouldn't speak for them," I said, making the obvious reply, "provided always, of course, it wouldn't be giving away too many secrets of state." "Oh, my dear sir," he said, with a smile which curled up at the ends of his little black, carefully trimmed mustache ever so slightly, "I should not have made you promise at the club the other night if I had not been prepared to absolutely rely on your discretion and my own. Now, there's whiskey and soda and brandy. Which do you prefer? You smoke, of course, and I think you'll find these pretty good. And that chair I can recommend. I've unraveled many a naughty problem in it, I can tell you. And now, he went on when we were at last comfortably settled, may I ask which of my relics most roused your professional curiosity? I was already on the tip of my tongue to ask the story of the gas pipe and the piece of india rubber, but the inspector forestalled me by saying, "But perhaps that is hardly a fair question, as they all will probably seem pretty strange to you. Now, for instance, I saw you looking at two of my curios when I came in. You could hardly expect them to be associated, and very intimately too, with the most daring and skilfully planned diamond robbery that ever took place in the fields, or off them, for the matter of fact. Would you?" "Hardly," I said. "And yet I think I have learned enough of the devious ways of the I.D.B. to be prepared for a perfectly logical explanation of the fact." "As logical as I think I may fairly say romantic," replied the inspector as he set his glass down. "In one sense, it was the most ticklish problem I've ever had to tackle. Of course, you've heard some version or other of the disappearance of the great De Beers diamond." "I should rather think I had," I said with a decided thrill of pleasurable anticipation, for I felt sure that now, if ever, I was going to get to the bottom of that great mystery. "Everybody in camp seems to have a different version of it, and, of course, everyone seems to think that if he had only had a management of the case, the mystery would have been solved long ago." "It is invariably the case," said the inspector, with another of his quiet, pleasant smiles, "that everyone can do work better than those whose reputation depends upon doing of it. We are not altogether fools at the department, and yet I have to confess that I myself was in ignorance as just how the diamond disappeared, or where it got to, until 12 hours ago. Now I'm going to tell you the facts exactly as they are, but under the condition that you will alter all the names except, if you choose, my own, and that you will not publish the story for at least 12 months to come. There are personal and private reasons for which you will probably understand without my stating them. Of course, it will in time leak out into the papers, although there has been and will be no prosecution. But anything in the newspapers will, of necessity, will be garbled and incorrect. And, well, I may as well confess that I am sufficiently vain to wish that my share of the transaction shall not be left altogether to the tender mercies of the imaginative penny-a-liner." I acknowledged the compliment with a bow as graceful as the easiness of the inspector's chair would allow me to make, but I said nothing, as I wanted to get to the story. "I had better begin at the beginning," the inspector went on, as he meditatively snipped the end of a fresh cigar. "As I suppose you already know, the largest and most valuable diamond ever found on these fields was really a magnificent stone, a perfect octahedron, pure white without a flaw, and weighing close to 500 carats. There's a photograph of it here on the mantelpiece. I've got another one by me. I'll give it to you before you leave Kimberly. Well, this stone was found about 6 months ago in one of the dives in the 800-foot level of the Kimberly mine. It was taken by the overseer straight to the De Beers offices and placed on the secretary's desk. You know where he sits, on the right-hand side, so you go into the boardroom through the green blasé doors. There were several of the directors present at the time, and, as you may imagine, they were pretty well pleased at the find, for the stone, without any exaggeration, was worth a prince's ransom. Of course, I needn't tell you that the value per carat of a diamond which is perfect, of a good color, increases a sort of geometrical progression with its size. I dare say that the stone was worth anywhere between 1 and 2 millions, according to the depth of the purchaser's purse. It was worthy to adorn the proudest crown in the world, instead of, but There, you'll think me very poor storyteller if I anticipate. Well, the diamond, after being duly admired, was taken upstairs to the diamond room by the secretary himself, accompanied by two of the directors. Of course, you have been through the new offices, it appears, but still, perhaps I had better just run over the ground, as the locality is rather important. You know that when you get upstairs and turn to the right from the landing, from the top of the staircase, there's a door with a little grill on it. You knock, a trapdoor is raised, and if you are recognized and your business warrants it, you are admitted. Then you go along a little passage out of which a little room opens on the left, and in front of you is another room leading into the diamond rooms themselves. You know, too, that in the main room fronting Stockdale Street and Jones Street, the diamond tables runs around two sides under windows, and are railed off from the rest of the room by a single light wooden rail. There's a table in the middle of the room, and on your right, as you go in, there's a big safe standing against the wall. You will remember, too, that in the corner exactly facing the door stands a glass case containing the diamond scales. I want you to particularly to recall the fact that these scales stand diagonally across the corner in the window. The secondary room, as you know, opens out to the left, but that is not of much consequence. I signified my resemblance with these details, and the inspector went on. The diamond was first put on the scale and weighed in the presence of the secretary and the two directors by one of the highest officials, a licensed diamond broker and the most trusted employee of De Beers, whom you may call Philip Marsden when you come to write the story. The weight, as I told you, in round figures was 500 carats. The stone was then photographed, partly for purposes of identification, and partly as a reminder of the biggest stone ever found in Kimberly in its rough state. The gem was then handed over to Mr. Marsden's care pending the departure of the diamond posts of Viborg on the following Monday. This was a Tuesday. The secretary saw it locked up in the big safe by Mr. Marsden, who, as usual, was accompanied by another official, a younger man than himself, whom you can call Henry Lomas, a connection of his, and also one of his most trusted members of his staff. Every day, and sometimes 2 or 3 times a day, either the secretary or one of the directors comes to ask and look at the big stone, either for their own satisfaction or to show it to some of their more intimate friends. I ought, perhaps, to have told you before the whole diamond room staff were practically sworn to secrecy on the subject because, as you will already understand, it was not considered desirable for such an exceedingly valuable find to be made public property in a place like this. When Saturday came, it was decided not to send it down to Cape Town for some reasons connected with the state of the market. When the safe was opened on Monday morning, the stone was gone. I needn't attempt to describe the absolute panic which followed. It had been seen 2 or 3 times in the safe on Saturday, and the secretary himself was positive that it was there at closing time, because he saw it was in the safe as being locked for the night. In fact, he actually saw it put in, for it had been taken out to show to a friend of his before a few moments. The safe had not been tampered with, nor could it have been tampered with or unlocked, because when it is closed for the night it cannot be opened again unless either the secretary or the managing director is present, as they each have the master key, within which the key used during the day is of no use. Of course, I was sent for immediately, and I admit that I was fairly staggered. If the secretary had not been so positive that the stone was locked up when he saw the safe closed on Saturday, I should have worked upon the story, the only possible one, as it seemed, that the stone had been abstracted from the safe during the day and concealed in the room, and somehow or other smuggled out, even though that would have been almost impossible in consequence of the strictness of the searching system and the almost certain discovery which would have been followed in attempts to get it out of the town. Both rooms were searched in every nook and cranny. The whole staff, naturally feeling that every one of them must be suspected, immediately volunteered to subject to any process of search that I might think satisfactory, and I can assure you the search was a very thorough one. Nothing was found, and when we had done that, there was a scintilla of evidence to warrant us suspecting anybody. It was true that the diamond was last actually seen by the secretary in charge of Mr. Marsden and Mr. Lomas. Mr. Marsden opened the safe. Mr. Lomas put the tray containing the big stone and several other fine ones into the usual compartment, and the safe door was locked. Therefore, the fact went for nothing. I suppose that one of the diamond room staff always remains in the room at night. There's at least one night watchman on every landing, and the frontages are patrolled at night by armed men of the special police. Lomas was on duty on Saturday night. He was searched as usual when he came off duty on Sunday morning. Nothing was found, and I recognized that it was absolutely impossible that he could have brought the diamond out of the room or passed it to any confederates in the street without having been discovered. Therefore, though at first sight suspicion might have been pointed to him as being the one who had apparently the last in the room with the diamond, there was absolutely no reason to connect that fact with its disappearance. I must say that there's a great deal plainer than the matter-of-fact than the other stories, as I've heard of the mysterious disappearance, I said, as the inspector paused to refill his glass and asked me to do likewise. Yes, he said dryly, the truth is more commonplace up to a certain point than the sort of stories a stranger will find floating about Kimberly, but I dare say you have found your own profession that in some times has a way of, to put it sportingly enough, giving fiction a 7-pound handicap and beating it with a counter. For my own part, I answered with an affirmative nod, my money would go on the fact every time. Therefore it would be to go on if I were betting. At any rate, I may say that none of the fiction that I have had so far has offered a reasonable explanation of the disappearance of the diamond. Given that the conditions which you have just stated, and as far as I can see, I admit that I couldn't give the remotest guess as to the solution of the mystery. That's exactly what I said to myself after I'd been worrying day and night for more than a week over it, said the inspector. And then, he went on, suddenly getting up from his seat and beginning to walk up and down the room with quick, irregular strides. All of a sudden, in the middle of a very smaller puzzle, just one of the common I.D.B. cases we have almost every week, the whole of the work that I was engaged upon vanished from my mind, leaving it for the moment a perfect blank. Then, like a lightning flash out of the black cloud, there came a momentary ray of light which showed me the clue to the mystery. That was the idea. These, he said, stopping in front of the mantelpiece and putting his finger on the glass case which covered the two relics that had started the story. These were the materialization of it. And yet, my dear inspector, I ventured to interrupt, you will perhaps pardon me for saying that your ray of light leaves me just as much in the dark as ever. But your darkness shall be made day, all in good course, he said with a smile. I could see that he had an eye for dramatic effect, and so I thought it was better to let him tell the story uninterrupted and in his own way, so I simply assured him of my ever-increasing interest and waited for him to go on. He took a couple of turns up and down the room in silence, as though he were considering in what form he should spring the solution of the mystery upon me. Then he stopped and said abruptly, I didn't tell you that the next morning, that is to say Sunday, Mr. Marsden went out on horseback, shooting in the veld up towards the range of the hills which lies over yonder, and in the northwestward between here and Berkeley West. I can see by your face that you're already asking yourself, what has this got to do with the sprinting of $1 million or so's worth of crystallized carbon out of the safe at De Beers? Well, a little patience and you shall see. Early that same Sunday morning, I was walking down Stockdale Street in front of De Beers' offices, smoking a cigar, and of course worrying my brains out about the diamond. I took a long draw at my weed and quite involuntarily put my head back and blew it up into the air. There, just like that, the cloud drifted diagonally across the street, dead in the direction of the hills, on which Mr. Philip Marsden would just be hunting buck. At the same instant, the revelation which had scattered my thoughts about the little case that I just mentioned came back to me. I saw in my mind's eye, of course. Well, now, what do you think I saw? I wouldn't spoil a comparative detective, I said, somewhat invariably. I should say that you would make an excellent storyteller. Never mind what I think. I'm in a plastic condition now, and I'm receiving impressions, not making them. Now, what did you see? I saw the great De Beers diamond, say from 10 to 1,500,000 pounds worth of concentrated capital, floating from the upper story of the De Beers Consolidated Mining, rising over the rooftops, and drifting down the wind to Philip Marsden's hunting ground. To say that I stared in silence of blank amazement at the inspector, who made this astounding assertion with a dramatic gesture and inflection which naturally cannot be reproduced in print, would be the merest commonplace. He seemed to take my stare for one of incredulity rather than wonder, for he said almost sharply, I see you're beginning to think that I'm thinking fiction now, but never mind, we will see about that later on. You have followed me, I have no doubt, closely enough to understand, having been exhausted of all my resources and my experience, and such a native with my wits of fate have given me, and having made the most minute analysis of circumstances of the case, I'd come to the fixed conclusion that the great diamond had not been carried out of the room on the person of a human being, nor had it been dropped or thrown from the windows to the street. Yet it was equally undeniable that it had got outside the safe and out of the room. Therefore it flew out, I suppose. I could not help interrupting now, I'm afraid. I could not quite avoid the suggestion of credulity in my voice. Yes, my dear sir, replied the inspector with an emphasis which he increased, slapping 4 fingers on his right hand to the palm of his left. Yes, it flew out. It flew some 17 and 18 miles before it returned to Earth, in which it was born, if we may accept the theory of a terrestrial origin of diamonds. So far as the event proved, I was absolutely correct, wild and, as you may naturally think, my hypothesis might have been. But, he continued, stopping his walk and making an eloquent gesture of apology, being only human, I almost instantly divided the truth into error. In fact, I confess to you that there was, what I consider to be the greatest and most fatal mistake of my career. Absolutely certain as I was that the diamond had been conveyed through the air to the Berkeley Hills, and that Mr. Philip Marsden's shooting expedition had been undertaken with the object of recovering it, I had all the approaches to the town watched till he came back. He came in by the old Transvaal road about an hour after dark. I had him arrested and took him to the house of one of my men who happened to live out that way, and searched him, as I might say, from the roots of his hair to the soles of his feet. I found nothing. Of course he was indignant, and of course I looked a very considerable fool. In fact, nothing would pacify him but that I should meet him the next morning in the boardroom at De Beers, and, in the presence of the secretary and at least 3 directors, apologize to him for my unfounded suspicions and the outrage that they had led me to make upon him. I was, of course, as you might say, between the devil and the deep sea. I had to do it, and I did it. But my convictions and my suspicions remained exactly what they were before. Then there began a very strange, and although you may think the term curious, a very pathetic waiting game between us. He knew that, in spite of his temporary victory, I had really solved the mystery, and was on the right track. I knew that the great diamond was out yonder somewhere among the hills and over the veld, and I knew, too, that he was only waiting for my vigilance to relax to go out and get it. Day after day, week after week, and month after month, the game went on in silence. We met almost every day. His credit had been completely restored at De Beers. Lomas, his connection, and, as I believed, his confederate, had been, through his influence, sent on a mission to England, and when he went I confess to you I thought the game was up, that Marsden had somehow managed to recover the diamond, and that Lomas had taken it beyond our reach. Still I watched and waited, and as time went on I saw that my fears were as groundless as the gem was still in the veld or in the hills. He kept up bravely for weeks, but at last the strain began to tell upon him. Picture to yourself the pitiable position of a man of good family in his old country, of expensive taste and very considerable ambition, living here in Kimberly on a salary of some £12 a week, worth about £5 in England, and knowing that within a few miles of him, in a spot that he alone knew of, there lay a concrete fortunes of, say, £1,500,000, which was his for the picking, if he only dared to go and take it, and yet he dared not to. Yes, it is a pitiless trade of ours, and professional thief-catchers can't afford to make much to do with mercy, and yet I tell you that I was watched that man day after day, and with a fever growing hotter than his blood, and the unbearable anxiety tearing it harder and harder at his nerves. I pitied him, yes, I pitied him so much that I even found myself growing impatient for the end to come. Fancy that, a detective and thief-catcher getting impatient to see his victim out of his misery. Well, I had to wait 6 months. That is to say, I had to wait until 5 o'clock this morning for the end. Soon after 4, one of my men came and knocked at my door. He brought me a note into my bedroom, and I read it in the bed. It was from Philip Marsden, asking me to go and see him at once, and alone. I went, and as you may be sure, with as little delay as possible, I found him in his sitting room. The lights were burning. He was fully dressed, and had evidently been up all night. Even I, who have been seen the despair comes from a crime in worst of its worst forms, was shocked at the look of him. Still, he greeted me politely and with perfect composure, not affected to see that the hand that I held out to him, but asked me quite kindly to sit down and have a chat with him. I sat down, and when I looked up I saw him standing in front of me, covering me with a brace of revolvers. My life, of course, was absolutely at his mercy, and whatever I might have thought of myself or the situation, there was obviously nothing to do but to sit still and wait for developments. He began very quietly to tell me why he had sent for me. He said, "I wanted to see you, Mr. Lipinski, to clear up the matter of the big diamond. I've seen for a long time, in fact, that Saturday night, that you worked out a pretty correct notion as to the way the diamond vanished. You are quite right. It did fly across the vale to Berkeley Hills. I'm a bit of a chemist, you know, and when I had once made up my mind to steal it, there was no way of mincing words now. I saw that it would be perfectly absurd to attempt to smuggle such a stone out of it by any ordinary methods. I dare say you wonder what these revolvers are for. They're to keep you here in that chair till I've done, for one thing. If you attempt to get out of it or utter a sound, I shall shoot you. If you hear me out, you will not be injured, so you may as well sit and keep your ears open. I have the stand of success, and I must have had a confederate, and I made one of enormous. If you look out on that little table beside your chair, you will see a bit of closed lead pipe with a tap in it, and a piece of thin sheet india rubber. That is what remains of the apparatus that I used. I make them a present to you. You may add as you like to your collection." Lomas, when he went out on duty that Saturday night, took a bit of the tube charged with compressed hydrogen and an empty child's toy balloon with him. You will remember that night was very dark, and the wind you had seen blowing very steadily toward the Berkeley Hills. Well, when everything was quiet, he filled the balloon with gas and tied the diamond. But how did he get the diamond out of the safe? The secretary saw it locked up that evening. I exclaimed in my curiosity of getting better at my prudence. "It was not locked up in the safe all that night," he answered, grinning with a sort of ghastly satisfaction. "Lomas and I, as you know, took the tray of the diamonds to the safe, and as far as the secretary could see, put them in. But as he put the tray into the compartments, he palmed the big diamond as I had taught him to do, and so many good lessons. At the moment that I shut the safe and locked it, the diamond was in his pocket. The secretary and his friends left the room, and Lomas and I went back to the tables, and I told him to clean the scales, as I wanted to test them. While he was doing so, he slipped the diamond behind the box, and there it lay between the box and the corner of the wall until it was wanted. We all left the room as usual, and, as you know, we were searched. When Lomas went on night duty, there was a diamond ready for the balloon voyage. He filled the balloon just as so that lifted the diamond and no more. The lead pipe he just put where the diamond had been, the only place you never looked in. When the row was over Monday, I locked it up in the safe. We were all searched the next day, and next I brought it away, and now you may have it. 2 of the windows were open on account of the heat. He watched his opportunity and committed it to the air about 2 hours before dawn. You know what a sudden fall there is in temperature here, and days before daybreak. I calculated upon that to extract the volume of the gas sufficiently to destroy the balance and bring the balloon to the ground, and I knew that if Loomis had obeyed my instructions, it would fall either in the veld or on his side of the hills. The balloon was a bright red, and to make a long story short, I started out before daybreak that morning, as you know, to look for Buck. When I got outside the camp, I took a compass bearings and rode straight down the wind towards the hills. By good luck or good calculation, or both, I must have followed the course of the balloon almost exactly, for in 3 hours I left the camp and saw a little red speck ahead of me among the stones on the hillside. I dodged about a bit as though I were really after a buck, in case anyone was watching me. I looked around to the red spot and took my foot on the balloon and burst it. I folded the India rubber up, as I didn't want to leave it there, and I put it in my pocketbook. Remember that when you searched me and you didn't open my pocketbook, of course it was perfectly flat, and the diamond couldn't possibly have been in there. That's how you missed your clue, though I don't suppose it would have been much use to you if you'd already guessed it. However, there it is at your service now. And the diamond. As I said these 3 words, his whole manner suddenly changed. So far he had spoken quietly and deliberately, and without even a trace of anger in his voice. But now his white, sunken cheeks suddenly flushed a bright fever red, and his eyes literally blazed at me. His voice sank to a low, hissing tone that was really horrible to hear. "The diamond," he said. "Yes, curse it and curse you, Mr. Inspector Lispinski, for it and you have been a curse to me. Day and night I have seen the spot where I buried it, and day and night you have kept your net spread about my feet so that I could not move a step to go and take it. I can bear the suspense no longer. Between you and that infernal stone, you have wrecked my health and driven me mad. If I had all the wealth of De Beers now, it wouldn't be of any use to me, and tonight a new fear came to me, that if it goes on much longer, I shall go mad, really mad, and in my delirium rob myself of my revenge on you by letting out where I hid it. Now listen, Lomas is gone. He is beyond your reach. He has changed his name, his very identity. I've sent him by different posts, and to different names and addresses 2 letters. One is a plain, and the other is key to it. Those are the 2 pieces of paper where he can find the diamond. Without them, you could hunt for a century and never go what's near it. And now you know that your incomparable stone, which should have been mine, is out yonder somewhere where you will never find it. You and De Beers people will be able to guess the tortures of Tantalus that you have made me endure. That is all you have got your smartness. That is my legacy unto you, and my curse. I had my way, I would send you all out there to hunt for it without food and drink till you died of hunger and thirst of my body. as you have made me die a living death of hunger and thirst of mind." As he said this, he covered me with one revolver and put the muzzle of the other in his mouth. With an ungovernable impulse, I sprang to my feet. He pulled both triggers at once. One bullet passed between my arm and my body, ripping a piece out of my coat sleeve. The other, well, I can spare you the details. He dropped dead instantly. "And the diamond," I said. "The reward is £20,000, and it is at your service," replied the inspector in his suavest manner, "provided you can find the stone, or